everyone. My name is Jesse Chason with Lisa Blanchard as the host of Airing Addiction.
I share often my journey started on this campus. Got sober as a client here, just like you.
I really do see phenomenal change.
Always hope. I've seen situations that on the surface look impossible become possible.
Doing this podcast is to share those recovery stories, be honest about what the challenges are and have some real conversations, but kind of share that out on the airwaves.
Welcome, everybody, to Airing Addiction. So glad you're here. If you're listening live or around live, this is the last podcast of the year, right before the Christmas holiday next week. Happy holidays to everybody listening, however you celebrate. If you do celebrate, we have a great episode here today with a phenomenal guest. Who do we have today, Lisa?
Well, I'm really excited about this, Jesse, and just a quick moment to just be grateful for those that listen to us and who have been on the podcast this year. It's really been a fantastic year on Airing Addiction, but I'm really excited to end the year with our guest. So today we have John Marhefka. I think I did that well, thumbs up, who, describes himself as a grateful father in recovery and probably extra grateful in the last, week and a half here. We can get to that. But I know John because he is the program director of one of Spectrum in New England Recovery Center's peer recovery centers in Marlboro, the Recovery Connection. And I've been really excited to have John come on and share a story because he wears lots of hats between the director of the Recovery Center, lots of other things that he's doing in the recovery community and in the recovery space. And I'm really excited to hear all about that. So John, welcome. Happy holidays, all of the things. We'd love for you to start us off with sharing as much of your story as you'd like. Tell us a little bit about how you got here.
Yes, thank you so much, Lisa and Jesse. I really appreciate this opportunity. So we'll hop right into it, right? So the first thing that really comes to mind is perspective and how much that has changed over my lifetime. I grew up in your very stereotypical two-parent household. My dad worked all the time, he was a provider, right? My mom did all the housework stuff. I had much older parents. My dad's 86 now. So it was a very old school stereotypical household, right? But it was in a very poor neighborhood. So while my parents were away, the term latchkey kids is thrown around, right? And I was a latchkey kid, right? I got dropped off at home and I was home alone until my parents got home from work. And because of that, the influence crept in from my neighborhood. And that was really what skewed my perspective. I didn't know it at the time, but as I was wandering off into these drug and gang riddled neighborhoods, right? And the reason that it intrigued me almost is because I kept getting my bicycle stolen. If I had a number of how many bicycles and basketballs that were stolen off of my front lawn, I'm sure it would blow everybody's mind. So one day I decided enough was enough, and I was going to go figure out what was at the end of my street. So I went down and my eyes were opened at way too young of an age to the glorified version of the street life, right? The fancy cars and the jewelry and all that stuff. And I was very quickly realized that if I didn't want to be a victim anymore, have my stuff stolen, I had to start standing up for myself. And that was the lessons that I started to learn really early, right? So then I started to make a name for myself because I stood up for myself. But the problem with that, right, was that I had a very good education. My father worked very hard to provide all of the things for me. So I went to a private elementary school, Venerini Academy. I went to St. John's High School. I mean, I couldn't have asked for more as far as an education was concerned. But the thing is that even though I went to parochial schools, I was still coming home to a neighborhood that, in order for me to survive, I had to carry myself a certain way. So it kind of got to the point where I didn't really fit in anywhere that I went. I was the street kid at private school. I was the kid in the private school uniform in the hood. And it was like, but then me going through these motions, I was accepted more from my neighborhood than I was accepted at my schools. At my schools, I was considered the problem child. I was all of these things, right? But when I was at home in the neighborhood, I was just surviving. I was just one of the guys. I was just somebody that would do what I needed to do. So early on, things like being around houses that people use drugs in, that was desensitized to me. I didn't think that there was anything wrong with that. Drug dealers, didn't think that there was anything wrong with that. When the cops came, you acted a certain way. You didn't say anything, and you moved away, and that was normal to me. I didn't realize that society's version of normal was not what I was seeing. So eventually I started like selling marijuana just by proxy because I was around people that did it. And like, why, you just like they say, you hang out with dogs, you get fleas, right? So that's what I did because that's what I thought was normal, right? I eventually ended up getting kicked out of St. John's High School for a few things, but nothing that really was significant. What it summed up to be was that my version of what was normal didn't align with the social acceptability of St. John's High School. And as much as I carried resentments before, now I see that. Like you didn't want the city kid influence around private around any kids, never mind public or private. You just didn't want that bad influence, but I didn't see myself as a bad influence because like I said, that was my version of normal. So once I got kicked out of school, I shortly thereafter doubled down in true John fashion, and I got my then high school girlfriend pregnant at 17 years old. So I love to compound my problems the best I can. So before I knew it, I had a baby on the way. And that was the first time that I really decided that like I'm not gonna do this. I'm not gonna be the stereotypical father that I saw growing up in the neighborhoods that I had that wasn't there. They didn't have their children. If they did, they were in the other room. Well, they were still doing things that weren't okay in the other room, right? So I finally like grabbed my life with two hands and got a bunch of jobs and did all I needed to do and got my first hole in the wall apartment and all of that stuff. And later on, I grew up. But to back up a little bit, throughout like the my childhood, right? And with the generation that I grew up in, you didn't talk about your feelings. You didn't talk about what happened inside the house, outside the house. You just didn't. You pushed it down and that was the end of it. Um, and throughout the early years of my life, again, perspective, I experienced sexual trauma, physical abuse, desensitizing to drug dealing, to prostitution, to violence. That was the answer. Somebody said something, you fought. Like that was it. There was no talking it out. So what I didn't realize is how great I got at compartmentalizing things. I would push it all down and it didn't matter because when I was at school, I had to push down the street side of me. And when I was at home in my neighborhood, I had to push out that private school kid because I was going to be a victim. So either place that I went, I couldn't be genuine. So I started to put on this facade. I learned real young that as long as everybody saw that things were okay on the outside, it didn't matter what was going on the inside. And I didn't realize how big of a toll that took. I had a social worker once that said was explaining the importance of therapy, right? Lisa, you're gonna love this one. He said your life is like a balloon, right? And every time something happens to you that's stressful or anything like that, you take a big breath into the balloon. And eventually that balloon gets so full that it's going to pop. And that's usually when people lose it and do things that aren't the best choices for them. However, with a therapist or with somebody now, peer support, right? Or somebody that you can rely on, right? Or confide in, not rely on. Every time you go talk to them, you let a little bit of air out of the balloon. And the idea isn't that you're just going to walk around with an empty balloon. The idea is that you're going to walk around with enough room in that balloon so that you don't explode the next time you take a breath into it. So that kind of changed my perspective a little bit. That I was literally walking around with a whole armful of balloons that were just on the cusp of breaking all the time. And it wasn't until I was 22, 23 years old that I had a falling out with the first mother of my children, the mother of my son who's 21 now, and my daughter who's 18 now. We had a falling out, and I wasn't able to see my children. And that was what, like I said before, that was what really gave me the catalyst to take back control of my life. But because I was in dad mode from 16 to 22, 23, I didn't gain any tools. I didn't gain any coping mechanisms. I was quite literally my father. I was a provider. That was what the definition of being a father was to me. As long as it was food in the cabinets, as long as the rent was paid, as long as, we had clean clothes, like that, my job was done. Like, well, not my job was done, but I felt satisfied that I was providing, I was being a father, because that's what being a father meant to me back then. So when I lost my children, right, or lost contact with them, I went off. I went off the deep end, right? And I started using. I started using cocaine. I started using other things. And God, if I knew what I knew now then, right? I didn't realize that I opened Pandora's box, because one thing that cocaine does is it affects the front part of your brain, right? That takes away your inhibition not to say things. So that gave me the confidence to share with my ex some of the trauma that I had gone through, because it was just easier for me to share at that point. I didn't realize that I wasn't sharing with somebody that had the tools to help me. And it took me down a very, very dark road. And like I said, I opened Pandora's box, because once the words left my mouth that I had experienced some of these things, it just escalated. And instead of asking for help, instead of doing what I know now I should have done then, which is reach out for help, get some professional help, all of the things, I toughed it down. And then now I lost the ability to close Pandora's box. So now I started to try to mask all that stuff with other substances. Once I got sick of staying up all night, I went the other way. And I am a product of the Oxycontin pandemic. The first opiate I ever touched in my life was an Oxycontin. I had no idea what it was. It was described to me that we're going to do this and we're going to kill today's job, and that's it. And at the end of the day, I was like, oh man, I was like, he was right. I feel great. And then the next thing I know, I called him back the next day. Hey, bring some more of those down. And before I knew it, I was sick. I didn't even know what being chemically dependent was. Had no idea. I was such a baby, such a baby. Um, and I went and I realized that after so after I started doing a lot of opiates, right? I was became dependent on the substance. So then when I didn't have money, I started pushing the things that morally I wouldn't have done before. I started to consider those things. And just like anything else, you touch it a little bit, and then you're like, oh, that wasn't that bad. And then next time it gets a little, just like any progressive illness there is, you know what I mean? You don't go for the gusto right off the bat. You start to, gradually get into it, and you desensitize yourself to it. And I did that for a long time, and eventually, it got me to the point where I committed a crime. I thought that it was going to be a real easy, I was just going to grab some money and run kind of situation. But to be totally honest with you, I did not even think of consequence. Didn't even cross my mind, not once, because the neighborhoods that I grew up in, you were in survival mode. You didn't worry about consequences. You dealt, and cops were a normal part of your life. Putting on that facade was a normal part of life. It is what it was, right? So I ended up doing something, getting charged as a joint venture. So the people that I was with committed a home invasion, and I got charged just alike for being a co-conspirator in the time in the crime. Um, Before I realized it, man, I was sitting at the Worcester County House of Correction, detoxing for the first time on H block, H113, never forget it. Um, Facing a minimum mandatory 15-year to life sentence.
Yeah.
It's just it's crazy to me to think how much has changed since then. But I didn't, at least I didn't even think twice about it. And that's the thing, perspective, right? No idea that, like, me saying, "Oh, what's the quickest way for me not to be sick anymore?" Oh, I'm gonna go get this. I'm gonna say that I want a 40 bag of marijuana, and I'm just gonna grab the money and run. That's all I thought it was gonna be, and I wasn't gonna be sick anymore, right? So that that stupid decision, that Saturday morning, right, ended up summing up my criminal history. I ended up getting 3 years in state prison and doing 9 separate county bids after that. Um, and I say that, right, that after the I ended up getting 3 years, three and a day in state prison for that. And before that time, I had no idea who I really was because that facade was always there, right? I never, it didn't matter who I was on the inside. It mattered who what the representation of myself was. That's why I think that, like, first dates are a fraud, because you're just meeting a representative of the person, or interviews for that matter. You're just meeting a representative. You're only meeting the person that I want you to meet, right? So after that happened to me, when I was in state prison, it was not it was not easy, but it was not for the reasons that people would think, right? I actually graduated the CRA, good old spectrum program, twice, twice, in 2 separate institutions. My mother passed away while I was incarcerated. I ended up getting into a physical altercation where I was jumped by a bunch of individuals, got my fibia and tibia broken in my right leg, got put in ICU, and then put in the hole for almost 2 whole months. Had to learn how to walk again. And I only say this because of I want to push home, like, how traumatic this whole situation was in perspective. Because to me, still, my eyes weren't open to, like, that's not normal. To me, I was just going through the motions. Like, this is just what happens to kids that grew up in the neighborhood that I grew up in. Like, you got time, you did state time, you took it on the chin, and that was it. You did your time, you left, right? But then I started going to, like, other programs. My first real glimpse of any type of recovery program was, in fact, the CRA, right? I learned how to draw while I was inside. And my positive attributes started to be highlighted. People, the teachers there, the, like, instructors, I don't know who you would call them now, would say, "Oh, you can draw? Well, we've got a position for that. It's called beautification," right? So then all I did all day long was draw stuff for the walls, right? And then I worked my way up from the bottom up to senior coordinator. I ended up getting into the altercation and moving to another institution. And I hobbled myself back down to the CRA building, and I'm like, listen, I was 7 days away from graduation. Like, I want my certificate. I want back. And they said, no, no, no. They said, all right, we'll start you back in phase 3 and we'll get you that certificate. Like, you earned it. I said, no, 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 no. I want to start from day one. I want to go all over again. Let's run this back. And that's what we did. So I ended up graduating the CRA like a week or two before I was released. So when so that was my first like real glimpse at recovery or treatment, because it wasn't even called recovery back then. We're talking about 2012, right? It wasn't even called recovery back then. Even though Convict Recovery Academy, but it was treatment that you were getting, right? So I went and the day I got out, I went and I made a Facebook, of course. I made a Facebook and put in all my information, and this person popped up, and it said the people that you may know, and it was my fiance, now soon to be wife, Kirsten. Um, so I was like, oh, I know from our childhood that she's been at this recovery thing for a grip now, right? So I messaged her and I said, hey, you still doing the clean and sober thing? And this was July 4th of 2014.
Nice.
And she said, yeah. She was like, where the hell have you been? And as anybody would ask. And I said, I think I said I was in Japan or something like that. That was the lie that my older son made up for my younger daughter, that dad was working in Japan, right? So I think I said I was in Japan or something like that. And she said, well, let's get a meeting, dude. Let's go to a meeting. So she picks me up for a meeting. It was Friday. We went to the old St. Matt's, the Four Corners in College Square. And beforehand, we stopped and got a coffee, just like every other person in the world before they had a meeting, right? She brought the newcomer to get a coffee. And she said to me, she said, well, how much clean time or how much recovery you got? And I was like, what do you mean? I got like 4.5 years clean. And she's like, that's not what I asked you. She said, I didn't ask you how much clean time you got. I asked you how much recovery you got. And I didn't even know how to answer that question. No idea. And it was at that moment that I realized that, like, I was still missing something. Like, my perspective was off, right? It's like I thought I went through the CRA and like I killed it. And I'm like, oh, I'm good. You know what I mean? Like, what more could I possibly have to learn? You know what I mean? I mastered that. And then things escalated very quickly between Kirsten and I. We ended up getting our first place together, and things just worked out exactly the way they were supposed to. I'm a firm believer in that things work out the way that they're supposed to. So we did everything that we could to get ourselves back together again, or get our lives back together again. I started seeing my children again, all of the things. And then eventually, due to some unfortunate circumstances, I had a slip. I had a relapse. And the reason that I ended up doing the other 9 separate county stays, I never got another charge. I just couldn't stay clean. It was supposed to be 3 years inside, 5 years probation. I turned that 5 years probation into 12 years probation because I just couldn't stay clean. I was missing something. My perspective was skewed, right? And I didn't know how to ask for help. I hadn't had that conversation with that social worker yet that dumbed down how important therapy is for people. None of it. I was beginning to see it. I was picking up these little tools here and there, but I didn't know how to use them yet. So I went through and I kept getting locked back up. And like, Kirsten didn't even know about it. I would say, I'm going to go check into probation. And then the next thing she knows, she'd get a phone call from receiving. And I'd say, sorry, babe, I did it again. And pick up the pieces all over again, right? I did this so many times. And then every time I'd manage to come out and I'd go to like Channing House, right? And I'd stay the 6 months there. And I met Noel and I met all these awesome people. I picked up some more tools, but I had no idea how to use them. No idea. Sure enough, I'd get my life back together and I'd give it away just as fast. I'd build up I've been doing construction my whole life. And that was because That's the only job I could get with my quarry. My mother always told me when I was younger, John, you got a record, you're screwed. You can't do anything that you want to do. And I didn't believe it because I was looking at all these people in my neighborhood that had the fancy cars, had the nice jewelry. I'm like, I don't need a degree. What do I need to go to school for? I'm like, I could just hustle this and I could buy that. And for a period of time, I was good at what I did. I'm good at whatever I do, whether it's real good or real bad. I go hard for it. And so I was like, I can get money just like anybody else. And when I asked, the older guys in the neighborhood, hey, I want to do what you do, they said, here you go do it. Right? I didn't have any good quality mentors in my life. My father was busy providing for us. He busted his butt. I have 3 sisters and a brother and my grandfather that all lived under my roof that he supported. So, and I'm only saying that because it's not for lack of effort on my father's side. He was just so busy that he didn't have the time to see what was going on. And then in the midst of 3 sisters and a brother, I'm the youngest one, so me sneaking out and going and hanging out in the neighborhood, nobody was paying attention to John. It was just the way things went, right? But going forward, I started going to like Channing House, and then I gave away my life again. And sure enough, I met Noel, right, through Kirsten, and I would call him. I'm like, Noel, I did it again. And he'd come up and he said something to me. He came up and he said, John, he said, for all the people that you used to put your cape on for, how many of them put it on for you? And I just sat there quiet. I was like, I'm sure there's somebody, but I can't think of them right now, Noel. And so again, I kept going through this, and for some reason, like perspective again, like I didn't realize how lucky I was, right? I hadn't been paying attention enough to realize how many people were dying, how many of my friends were dying, because again, I compartmentalized everything I did. If somebody died, oh, I just they deserved it, or nah, it won't happen to me, and that was it. I never really thought that like that could happen to me. And that's just that was my coping mechanism. That was my defense mechanism. So then I start getting a feel for all of this stuff, the recovery that Kirsten's talking about, that Noel's talking about. And I'm like, all right, I'm like, you know what? I want to find out what makes me tick, right? Because something's off, right? Something's off. So I went to college for psychology. And the only class I had was like a 5:30 in the morning class. Not only did I ace the class, but I got extra points because I was never missed a day. I even did the extra credit assignments afterwards just because I was so intrigued by it. Because now I started to understand. I started to realize how to use some of these tools and why they were significant. Because if you don't establish the significance to me, I don't want to waste my time with it. So now I'm starting to put these pieces together, right? And fast forward a little bit, I got hurt. And because I got hurt, I was working construction. I finally worked my way up from like a ground laborer to running my own construction company, owning my own construction company, one of the many things that I've given away over the years, a couple times. And then finally I said, I'm not going to work for myself anymore. I'm going to work with somebody else. So I finally built myself up to this beautiful construction company. I was a project manager. I was making good money. I had a company truck, all of the things. It was like I finally, like 2 years ago, I breathed the first sigh of relief, and I'm like, this is it. Like, this is my job. I got it. Like, I'm good, right? And then one day I walk in, and I thought that I was going to talk about a project that I was estimating. He was like, come in here real quick. And I went into the boss's office, and HR is sitting there. And I had a cup of coffee in my hand, gum in my mouth. And I'm like BSing with the other employees on my way by, laughing with them. I walked in, read the room, spit my gum out, threw my coffee out like, this is going to hurt. I had no idea what it was about. Come to find out, somebody said, oh, this kid, John, man, he knows what he's doing. Like, what's up with him? And somebody looked up my name and found out that I had a criminal record, and I lost that job. It hurts. The fact that I had to pick up that phone again, call Kirsten, and be like, I did it again. It had nothing to do with drugs. Like, I put it down. I didn't pick up again. And like it was still there. Like these problems kept kept coming up, and it was because perspective, man. I was misrepresenting myself. I'm fortunate. You want to talk about white privilege, right? I have the privilege of when I walk into an interview, they don't think you're a criminal, you're a drug addict, you've got a felony record. So they're like, oh, John's good. And then I shine with what I do, and they're like, oh, he's great. But the proof, the truth always comes out. It always comes out. So I go and I'm really like reassessing my life at this point. And I'm like I'm not ever doing this again. I'm not doing this to my family. Our Kirsten and I had our then 3-year-old daughter Olivia, who's 4.5 now. And I was done. I could not do that anymore. And she worked for advocates, and she was a recovery coach, and I was like seeing, and because I was at home now, I'm like hearing about all the stuff that she's doing, and I'm so intrigued by it, right? And I see the circle that she's building,
Mhm.
and I it was different to me, right? Because it was authentic. There was no bullshitting about it, right? It was truth, right? So I'm like, all right, and I'm like, you know what? I think I want a piece of that. I think I want some of that, right? And she said, listen, she was just like, I know people. And the next thing I know, I was on the when the REC just took over Recovery Coach Academy. I was in that first class, right? And Angela D'Alessio and Michelle were the ones that did it. I the best people on earth, some of the best people on earth, because I can't narrow it down to just them.
Yeah.
But then I did the Recovery Coach Academy, and I'm like, this is awesome. And I'm like, and the best thing is like the top piece of this, the three-legged stool is like treat people as a resource. And I was being treated as a resource. And I'm like, I I, I am a professional. What I am the expert. You're right. You're right. I am the expert on me. And it was the first time that it was ever put to me like that. So now I saw the significance in what I had been through. And I realized that like I wonder how many other people just haven't made that connection yet. So then I go and I get more immersed in my work. I get more immersed in the circle and helping people. And it wasn't even like anything I was doing. All I was doing is asking good questions. Like that's all I have to do is like it is instead of talking at people, like I'm going to talk with them because that was my experience with the clinical side of things, how we did things a decade and a half ago, the criminal justice system. They told you when to stand up, sit down, go to sleep, and eat. And that was it. So like I became accustomed to that because my perspective was you do what you're told. That's it. You don't feel things, all these things. Then I start realizing that wait a second, like I this is it. Like I've got this, right? So then I realized my wife said, listen, I gotta introduce you to this guy. I know you guys are gonna hit it off. And Matt Gear,
Yep.
awesome person, right?
Listen to
And
his podcast too, listeners, if you haven't
Yep.
yet.
yes, he was
Great
the last
episode.
one.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So she said, you got to meet this kid, man. Like he gets it, John. Like he gets it. So I end up meeting Matt, right? And we start talking about all this stuff. And he's already a program director at Perennial Recovery and doing all of this stuff. And I'm sitting there and I start talking about stuff. I said, listen, man, like I got an idea, dude. Like I wanna build something, right? I want to start advocating for guys coming out of the criminal justice system that just don't know any better. Because one thing I realized is why I rose to the top of the CRA is because I had a good education, right? And I had access to things and I knew that I didn't have to take the short. So when we had to write all those like biographies and all the things to phase up, right? I was killing it. And then other people were like, John, can you help me do that? And then I'm absolutely. So I started tutoring people. And I realized that it wasn't me that was really I had an advantage. Call it what you want, right? But I know a little something that there is something better. There's I heard something once that a scientist took a bunch of fleas and they put them in a jar, right? And when they jumped, they could only hit the lid, right? But then the next generation of fleas, when you dump them out, they only could jump as high as the lid because that was their genetics had changed. So that's all the other people that I knew that didn't think that they deserved any better is they just thought that that was where the lid was, man. So I say to Matt, I said, listen, I want to start this thing, and without hesitation, let's do it. Let's get it. And that's how guided addiction access points was started. Gap recovery is what we do is we advocate, educate, and empower men with criminal justice and DCF involvement because I personally know what that did to me. I know, granted, I didn't lose my kids to the department, but I might as well have. And let me tell you, when the wheels came off that time, it was the start of all of this. All of this was me not having my children at home, that I knew that no matter what I did during the day, I had to make it back to them. Once I didn't have to make it back to them, I didn't have any worth at that point, right? But I go and he doubled down. He was just like, absolutely, man, like let's get this. So then we start doing more advocacy work. And I'm gonna fill you guys in on a little my long plan on how I got to the seat that I'm at with Spectrum right now is throughout the years of being with Kirsten, like she was very involved with Everyday Miracles Peer Recovery Center, right? So, and the same thing with Channing House. Channing House, the year and a half I spent there, over a couple periods of time, every noontime, rain, sleet, snow, shine, down there. You walk down there. And so I was again picking up some of these tools, right? And I went to the St. Patrick's Day parade a couple years ago, and everybody was there, but there was no decorations, or there was no like wood, or it was just a flatbed. And they were like, John, can you build us a railing? I said, of course I can build you a railing. Where's the wood? They were like, what wood? I was like, okay, where are the tools? They were like, what tools? We worked it out. But after that, I went to Kirsten, and I was like, listen, we're never letting that happen again. I was like, that was the saddest thing that I have ever seen. And this is just after COVID. So it was like, I was like, we're never letting this happen again. So we go and I talked. She was like, well, you got to talk to Athena first. I had heard of Athena, didn't know who she was. Literally, she was standing in front of me and just going to make her laugh when she hears it. But I was just like, hey, is Athena ever going to come? Kirsten's just like, John, she's standing right there. I was like, okay. So I walked over to Athena. I'm like, hey, I'm John. And she was like, hey, come on in here. And we go into the office. I was like, listen, I don't ever want this to happen again. I'm a contractor, all this stuff. Like, let me hit this out of the park. And in true participatory fashion, because at that point I was just a member, she gave me all the motivation I needed. She was like, listen, tell me what you need, put in a request, I'll get you the money for it. Do A, B, and C. And as long as you keep me filled in with how you're going to do things, you take the wheel on this, man. Fast forward, she realized that like I knew how to like keep track of receipts and put in expense reports. And because instead of me she thought I was just going to get she was going to get text messages with receipt, but it was all broken down. I had it on one of my old business invoices. She was just like, where the hell did you come from? And she starts asking more questions. She's like, I've heard about you. Like, well, I've heard of you, right? And then we end up showing up with the float from last year with the big rainbow with the recovery on it.
That float. I love that float.
Yes.
Nice.
So we designed and we built that, right? And we painted it out and back at Everyday Miracles, like all of this stuff. And like every time Athena would show up to just make sure that things were coming off the rails, she was just like, you got this. She was just like, just let me know when you need anything. So her and I started working more and more together. And then the opportunity showed up to be, I said, listen, I think I want a job. I want to be more involved in this. I understand the participatory process. I understand treatment and how it's laid out. I understand all of this stuff, right? So I went to be a recovery coach, and she was like, I don't think that fits. She was just like, she was like, come down and do that. But she was just like, we're missing something. Then the opportunity came from Marlboro. And she said, she ran outside after Miracle Mamas one day when she realized that like the position was readily available, and she ran outside to Kirsten after Miracle Mamas, and she was just like, you tell John I want him in Marlboro. And that's the rest is history. But that's how I got where I was. And like I can say the biggest difference now, right, is instead of me carrying around this burden of all of this stuff that I've done in my life and like the negatives and having to lie and misrepresent myself, before I applied for the job with Athena, I said, Athena, you and I got to talk. And I took her out back at EDM and I said, listen, I got a bad record. Like, I got this, I got that. And she was like, is that it? I was like, yeah, that's it. And she was like, anything open? I was like, Athena, I haven't been in trouble in 10 years. And she was just like, oh, you're good. And walked away. I was like, wait, what? She was like, if anything else, John, she was just like, that's what's going to get you this job. Why do you think I want you to do what, like, you get it, right?
No.
And that was the first time that, like, I had felt seen, that I had felt like all of the stuff that's happened to me was worth it. Like, there was reason behind it, right? And like before, like I used to think that being a father was just providing, right? It's like now, like I love to just put my kids to bed at the end of the day. I love to be the first person that they wake up and like my daughter, she yells my name and I go in and grab her or lay down with her for a minute and she wants her chocolate milk in the morning. And like I love that routine. Like it has nothing to do with like I don't care if there was no food and we were living in my car. As long as I'm surrounded by my kids and my family, that's what means the world to me.
Yeah.
Oh, John, that's just such a great one. I didn't know you went to CRA. I did like this. This is my favorite thing about this podcast. Like I have a conversation. I said, I'd love to have you on. And I learned so many amazing things and so many connections that just remind me why I do this.
And that's why I said when we talked that night at the annual meeting,
yeah.
and I was like, well, what are we going to talk about? You were like, your story. I was like, I don't know if you guys are ready.
Well, I love it. I love it. And one of the themes, and Jesse, I'm sure you have so much to say because there's a lot of parallels with your life. But one of the things I really want, and I think you obviously know this because you touched on it so many times, right? Is that perspective, but also this integration of your whole self, right? So even when I hear you talk about being a father now, and what you talked about before, that when that identity was removed from you because you didn't have access to your kids, then nothing else mattered because you're like, it's a huge part of your identity, but there's so many other parts of who you are that you get to bring to every day now, right? So all of your construction time made it so that you were doing these great invoices and Athena was like, all right, like you just made my life easier. Thank you.
Yes.
And like all of that time was worthwhile. All of that time you spent, even when you were feeling so out of place as a kid, right? Like, but you got some exposure to like how things could be different in some of the educational structures. You brought that to the CRA. It's just like, like woven throughout your whole story is just everything landing you kind of where you are now. And I'm sure you'll continue that journey of being able to show up as all of you, every part of you, instead of just parts that you're hiding the rest of it.
Yes. And that's what it is, right? Is I didn't know what my purpose was. I didn't know who I was. I was a representative of who I thought you liked the most. And I don't have to do that anymore. And that's why I love peer support, right? Because like I wouldn't be where I was if it wasn't for Kirsten, if it wasn't for Matt, it wasn't for Athena, it was any of them. I wouldn't be here. And the thing is like when you lack purpose, when you lack thinking that you deserve better, like you're not going to get better. Somebody told me once, John, if you hang out with 5 people that are in debt, you're going to be in debt. You hang out with 5 millionaires, eventually you're going to be a millionaire. And that's what I realized is that like I have surrounded myself by people in recovery coaches, treatment providers. We live this. It's not an act, right? We don't turn this off. Just like being a dad. I'm a dad 24 hours a day, but I'm also I'm in recovery and I'm in peer support 24 hours a day. It makes no difference. And that's why I think Matt and I with Gap Recovery, and we founded Project Healing House, which is sober living, but it's more like structured sober living. It's not sober houses, but it's supportive housing where we give people that are trying to get reunified with their children that gives them an opportunity, a safe place to do that. We work with MASH. We're not MASH certified. Well, one of our houses isn't MASH certified, but we still work with MASH because the thing is like you can't have children in a house if you're MASH certified. But we're still at the table with the director of MASH, making sure that every other aspect is up to code and in at an
Yeah.
acceptable level. So that because we're not trying to hide anything, we're just trying to help a different demographic of people than what fits in the typical cookie cutter. And that's why I think we've made such a difference is, there's tons of detoxes, tons of treatment, tons of MASH sober houses, all of this stuff, right? But what about the tough cases, right? What about the cases like me, right? That like fell through the cracks, that like if I didn't happen to stumble upon some peers that showed me how to use the tools, right? Like where would I be? I'm a firm believer, right? Like I said, if everything happens for a reason, and I'll kind of end on this one, right? Is like you go through life and you find some people that are like so good at what they do, like that photographer that like everything that they do is just amazing, right? There's that mechanic that like he listens, oh, I know what that is, right? And the car's done before the end of the day. It's because everything in their life, right? They've gone through it and they've honed this skill down. And finally, they become a master of their craft. And like, I didn't realize that, like, going to jail, growing up in that crappy neighborhood, having the father that was present yet absent at the same time, having my kids taken away from me, all of that stuff, I didn't realize that I was honing my craft that whole time. That's why it's so natural to me now, because it is quite literally who I am. And the fact that I'm proud of who I am today it just that's the icing on the cake for me. Like I don't have to worry about did I hurt somebody yesterday? Because if I did, I quickly we talked about it. We had a conversation about it. And I don't have to bring my problems into the future. I don't have to compartmentalize anymore. I don't have to ask for help when for something that happened 2 weeks ago, because when I'm struggling I can reach out, and most importantly I'm around peers that if I'm a little off, they're gonna be like, John, man, let's go take a walk. And
Yeah.
that's it. It's just I'm so happy to finally be at a place, right, that I feel like all of that trauma, all of that tragedy, all of that chaos that happened in my life, it was worth it. And
Yeah.
I believe that down to the bottoms of my feet,
Yeah.
that everything that happened to me, right from even losing my mom when I was in jail, the one person that was there for me through anything. And she got sober because of me. When she passed away, she was over 30 years sober, because when she found out she was pregnant with me, she never picked up another drink again.
Wow.
But I couldn't be there for her. But now I can be. I can be there for everybody.
Yep. John, your gratitude for life exudes through your story, and I just want to thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that. Every time we get on here and hear someone's story, it's like you're taking us on the journey of your life with us. And I've just been sitting here, and yeah, I got a ton of notes, and like Lisa had hinted toward, we have a lot in common, man. We have a lot in common. We're probably around the same age. I just did some quick math. Parochial school, not fitting
Yeah.
in the neighborhood we grew up in, fish out of water, institutions, jails, getting if one thing, I don't know if you exactly said it like this, but what I heard from your story is like you learn things the hard way,
Oh,
right? You don't even know what OxyContin was. And then
it's
it's like, oh, why am I getting sick? Or,
it's funny you say that, because my mother always used to say to me, you don't learn from doing things right. And that's why I'm so good at so many things,
yeah.
because I screw them up three, four,
Yeah.
5 times
Yeah.
before I
And
can.
you've helped me in my own recovery today, hearing your journey and story. And I certainly can identify with that too, doing things, finding 99 ways to do things not right.
Mhm.
And, I know Marlboro is that much better for having you here, and just that how you kept on hitting on perspective, right? Another thing that I like to point out is that yes, you went through all those traumatic experiences, and that's what it is, right? We're no longer stuffing down those feelings, we're no
Yes.
longer compartmentalizing. We're saying like, this is trauma, this shaped and affected and molded the way I am here today. And because you've been through all that, like you know how bad life can get. So something as simple as when you saw that float and, you know, said, "Oh, I can fix that." Something, maybe, five people walked by that float and said, "Oh, wow, that's awesome. They have a float here." But you said, "Oh, we can actually make it better."
Right.
And, you know, railings, decorations, what have you. Uh, I'm getting the vibe that it meant that much more to you
Oh,
because you knew what it was like to go through those experiences
yeah.
earlier in life.
And I do want to take a second too and thank Spectrum, right? Because it sounds like cliche and sounds cheesy and all that, right? But honestly, nobody took a chance on the real me. Nobody did,
Yeah.
right? Until Athena was just like, "You're it," and like, and she's building an army. She's
Mhm.
building an
Awesome.
army. And I'm honestly, I can't say enough good things because the more people that like I interact with and like I can be my authentic self, right? And like the thing is like I'm no longer judged based off the merits of my past, right?
Mm.
Everybody knows that like without that you couldn't have this. So they embrace this, which is me, my authentic self, right?
Yeah.
And I'm realizing that like without the chance that Athena took on me, right? The chance that I have now with Spectrum, like that's why like I shouted from the rooftops. I'm on like 6 different opioid abatement task force, Marlboro Alliance for Prevention, like all of this stuff, right? But I couldn't have gotten in there as John Marhefka, right? I couldn't have gotten in there. I got in there as a program director for Spectrum Health Systems. And like and that's the thing is like that's what I want to keep carrying it on is like Spectrum's had like this stigma attached to it too. Oh, that's just outpatient. That's just everybody's on methadone. That's what Spectrum does. No, that's not what Spectrum does. Spectrum actually helped Matt Gear and I found Gap Recovery with their community impact
Community
grant.
impact grant.
And,
Yep.
and now we're here. And now we have other investors. Now we have municipalities that want to give us money so that we can continue to do the outreach for them. And none of that would have been possible as John Mahafka. But it's possible now because I'm not just John Mahefka, the guy that'll do whatever you need me to do. Now I'm John Mahefka, the program director for Spectrum Health Systems, and like to be able to walk into a room and like have people know who you are and know that like there's an agency like Spectrum behind me. They're like, oh, they must have he's got to be all right.
Yeah.
And like just like anything else, like this is just like anything else. Like you're still only one bad decision away from doing something stupid or blowing up your world, right? But that's the thing is like when you're so happy and you're so content with me being me that I no longer need to mask all that. You can take all the substances away in the world, right? But like the common denominator in all my problems is me. I'm still left. Take away all that stuff, you're still sitting with John, right? And like now that I've realized that, like once I fixed up here a little bit and I gave myself some purpose, that like none of that, me having a bad day and going and using, no. I'm gonna walk across the street and I'm gonna go yell and cry to Matt for a little bit, and then he'd be like, "You good, bro?" I'll be like, "I'm good, bro. I'll see you tomorrow." And
Yeah.
that's it. That's as easy as it is. Instead of throwing my whole life down the drain, like what was I thinking? And like and that's it. It's like having some people that believe in you too, peer support, man, on every level of knowing, no, you can do this. And it's okay to have bad days too. I'm not saying it's
Mhm.
all about the good, right? Because we all have bad days. We were talking about holidays. Holidays are heavy, man. They're heavy, right? But like the funny thing is though, is like now like we're starting our own traditions this year with my recovery family. So like I
Oh,
don't have
cool.
to worry about all that. Like and that's the thing is like I know not everybody's where I'm at, but like I started seeing somebody else that had something that I wanted, and I
Yeah.
realized that like there's a better way to do things.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm at now is like I don't have to look at that guy that used to to get over it. I'm gonna look at the guy that like doesn't use no matter what.
Yeah. John, I know we're up against it to wrap here in a little bit, but I just do need a second your appreciation, gratitude for Spectrum, and to tie it in together with the holidays. I got released from jail on parole to Spectrum 2 days before Christmas,
Yeah.
and that experience of not only a holiday in recovery, which was foreign and new for me, but also to have that support of 60 other people in that house. I still, and I've been able to live and do a lot of really cool things in recovery, but I still think back to this New Year's Eve party we had where like it would never happen again, but they let us all like use food stamps and get like thousands of dollars worth of junk food at BJ's down the
Yes.
street. And like we had a DJ and there was chaos, but it was sober chaos. It was
Yes.
still some of the funnest time. Like I
Yes.
think even now, like I think back just to this like goofy stuff we were doing in recovery, having fun, and
Right.
like that. There's nothing that can ever touch that moment. Like that feeling is with me for the rest of my
Forever.
life, and that's
Forever.
because of Spectrum. And you talk about you used to be judged by your past or even losing that job because of your past and getting a chance here, right? Getting a chance really to be the true authentic self. Yeah, certainly I've had those similar chances and opportunities and grateful for them. And um one of them is this commercial that runs for Spectrum every now and again. And I wanted to say something like really like out there to grab people's attention. So I start off with saying I showed up here on parole and
Yeah.
now I work and blah 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 blah. They played that before the Patriots game last month, and I got so many messages on social media from people I barely know and
Yes.
family I don't talk to, and not one of them
Love
was
that.
I wouldn't believe how would you dare say that? And
Right.
everything was like, good job, so glad things are going well, all this stuff. It's like, yeah, no one's perfect. Some people make mistakes. For people like us, John, that includes prison or jail. Like
Yes.
it is what it is. There's life after that, and how cool that you and Matt and others and with Spectrum's help and other municipalities help are, creating programs to continue this miracle to be reproduced. Oh,
Yes.
cool.
That's what it's about, man. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and all the things that you both are talking about now is you get to show up kind of as yourself. It's not that all of your past, all of the trauma, all of the things that have happened to you, and all the things that just happen daily for all of us. Like things still happen to all of us, but you get to kind of show up as yourself, see it, right? Instead of push it down and
Feel
then
it.
not do it alone, right? So those are some of those themes that I'm hearing is, when you've done the work to take a look at yourself and show up as your whole true self, it's not that that trauma stuff doesn't come up, you just see it when it does. And you
Yes.
ask for the support that you need in the moment from your
Right.
supports, your peer supports, your recovery community, your family.
Yeah, and it's also all right. Like that's all right. It's all right to have bad. It's all right to feel it, right? And
Yeah.
like that's I'd love to come back on with Matt, right, and talk
Yeah,
about some
oh,
of the other
that
things
would
that
be
we've
like a
been.
Yeah.
fun party, a fun
Yeah,
podcast party. Let's
because
do
one of the
that.
things, right, that like the side of our hoodies say find peace in the pain, right, for Project Healing
Mhm.
House. And it's because like we're not going to stop the bad stuff from happening. We can't change the past. Like it's okay to feel, right?
Mhm.
You just don't want to sit in it by yourself and do something stupid, but it's okay to feel, man.
Yeah.
It's okay to feel, to share, because until you feel, you can't heal from it. And if you're not healing open wounds, they're going to stay open forever. And like
Yeah.
that's why Matt and I do what we do, is because we found a way to heal. We heal together. And like
Yep.
that's okay.
Yeah.
That's so fantastic. That's beautiful. All right, I don't know that we could end it on any better note than that. John, this was a true gift. This was one of my holiday gifts for this
Ditto.
season. So I just really appreciate you coming on with a last minute request when you just had a baby, when you've got a lot going on in your life, and still making space and time for this and showing up just as you are.
As I say, I thrive in the chaos. And that's one of the things that I think Athena saw in me. And she was like, man, she was like, most people buckle under pressure. And I'm like, bring it on. Let's get it. I've had kids
Let's
since
do
I
it.
was 16 years old. Like, what's a little sleep loss? Come on now,
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah.
I'll sleep
Well,
at some point.
Yeah, sometime.
Thank you very much, John. My day and my recovery has definitely been enriched with your story, and I look forward to getting to know you more and look forward to having you back on the podcast as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you guys so much. I appreciate both of you.
All
And
right.
James, even though he's not on camera anymore.
Yeah.
James,
We
producer
should take a minute
extraordinaire.
to thank James because we would
Yes.
not be here without James. The podcast
Yes.
would not get produced without James. So,
No, it takes a village. It takes a village, and that's another thing that I'm realizing. Is it's not just the people you see.
absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, James. Thank
Thank
you
you,
to
Lisa.
our listeners. We really look forward to a fantastic 2025. And one of those
Yes.
episodes is going to be a podcast party with John and Matt here. So that sounds like a great way to wrap it up. I hope everybody has a peaceful and wonderful holiday season, however you celebrate. Thanks for listening to Airing Addiction.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.